There is a secret within our family. A secret that my husband Stephen and I have been hiding from our daughter, Melissa. It's not that we want to keep it hidden forever, but we plan to tell her when the time was right. Unfortunately, my cowardice has kept me from revealing it up to this day. I constantly worry that when we do tell her, it might shock her or worse, make her resent us. So, I have remained silent. I wished we could get through until her high school graduation without any issues, but reality isn't that kind. Melissa, wanting to contribute to society, went to donate blood with her friends, and it was there she discovered our secret. Yes, through her blood type. The blood donation staff casually mentioned her blood type, which made her realize something was off. Stephen and I both have blood type O. However, the staff told Melissa that her blood type is A. When Melissa came home, I noticed she was acting strangely. When I asked her about it, she looked like she wanted to say something but remained silent. At dinner, when Stephen got home, Melissa looked determined, like she had made up her mind about something.
Was I an abandoned child?
Startled and unable to speak, my silence only fueled Melissa's anxiety, and she ran to her room crying. My name is Allison, I'm 41 years old. I work part-time at a supermarket. My husband Stephen is an office worker, and our daughter Melissa just turned 17 and is a high school student. We live in an apartment complex for families. Though it's not luxurious, we have a comfortable life. I'm known for being indecisive, but Melissa is the complete opposite, lively and dependable, so we balance each other out. Most of our conversations at home are started by Melissa. She tells us about her day at school, things that happened during club activities, even small details. We always look forward to listening to her stories. As for Stephen, he's incredibly kind and understanding, never losing his temper with us. Whenever a problem arises, he calmly assesses the situation and finds a solution before anyone gets too emotional. For 17 years, we've maintained this delicate balance in our family. Every day, we have breakfast and dinner together, listening to Melissa's stories and enjoying our time as a close-knit family. Today, Melissa talked about walking our neighbor Emily's dog and finding a gecko on her way home from school. She shared these stories with her usual enthusiasm. But we have a secret. A secret we've been hiding from Melissa. I intended to tell her when she graduated from middle school, but my lack of courage kept me from doing so. The longer I delayed, the harder it became to tell her. Now, we must tell her by the time she graduates from high school, but the thought still terrifies me. I kept thinking about what would happen if our relationship fell apart, or if Melissa ended up despising me. These negative thoughts always come to my mind first. I know it's a bad habit of mine. Stephen offered to talk on my behalf if I found it too hard to do myself, but I insisted on speaking in my own words, so he is patiently waiting for me. He might be frustrated inside with me for not being able to bring it up, even though I asked for it myself. But he respects my wishes and waits for me without saying a word. That's just the kind of person Stephen is. I've been saved countless times by his considerate nature. The matter at hand concerns Melissa's birth and her relationship with Stephen. Back in my college days, 2 men from my university asked me out. One was Thomas, a close friend from high school, and the other was Stephen, with whom I hit it off through a university club. I didn't have romantic feelings for either of them, and I struggled to decide, but eventually, I chose to date Thomas. When I turned down Stephen's confession, I told him I wanted us to stay friends, not lovers. Stephen kindly accepted this and said he would always be there for me if I needed someone to talk to. Even now, I sometimes think how much better it would have been if I had chosen Stephen back then. There's no use in regretting, but those thoughts still come up. I think Thomas and I started dating in the winter of our sophomore year. At the beginning of our relationship, he often took me to aquariums and theme parks. I wasn't particularly attractive, but Thomas was keen to impress me, especially after learning that Stephen had also confessed his feelings to me around the same time. As time went on, I started getting used to dating and began to think about a future with Thomas. When we graduated, I moved in with Thomas. Living together revealed sides of Thomas that I hadn't seen before. We both started working, but all the housework was left to me, and he had a habit of spending money recklessly. The savings we had set aside for our future were used up without my knowledge, and he showed no remorse for it. I couldn't take it anymore and asked him to help with the housework or to be more careful with his spending, but instead he would get angry, and I started to feel more and more out of control. Though he never physically hurt me, he began staying out late or not coming home at all, and it felt like our cohabitation had lost its purpose. I was exhausted from trying to cope alone, as I had no one to turn to in this new environment. I thought about breaking up many times, but the fear of his anger kept me silent, and time just passed by. Then, when I fell ill and went to the doctor, I was told that I was pregnant. No matter the circumstances, having a child was precious to me, so I immediately told Thomas. He became furious and demanded I get an abortion. Thomas had no intention of sharing a life with me. He saw me as nothing more than someone to take care of household chores and other errands. Raising a child would mean being tied down by marriage and family responsibilities, and he strongly insisted that I get rid of the baby. But I couldn't give up my child. With a desperate need to protect my unborn baby, I left the house where I had been living with Thomas. However, when I moved to New York for college, I had no family nearby to rely on, and I couldn't afford to take time off from my new job. Feeling lost, I decided to visit Stephen, whom I hadn't seen since graduation. Stephen was understandably surprised by my sudden visit, but he could see how desperate I was and let me into his apartment without hesitation. After I explained my situation, he sat with me and helped me figure out what I could do. Stephen told me he still loved me and that he was happy I came to him for help. I didn't want to take advantage of Stephen, so I planned to stay for a short while, give birth on my own, and move on with my life. However, Stephen wasn't okay with that. He said that knowing I was pregnant, he couldn't just watch me struggle and do nothing. "I want you to consider living with me," he said. His words were meant to ease my guilt. Stephen might have been going through his own inner turmoil, but he chose to accept me and my unborn child. I felt like I was taking advantage of his kindness, so I promised to support our life together in any way I could. Stephen agreed, as long as it was within my means. When my sudden pregnancy was discovered at work, people looked at me with curiosity, but thanks to some understanding colleagues, I was able to resign peacefully. Stephen suggested that it would be easier for the child if we unified our last name, so we filed for a marriage certificate. He was extremely considerate of my sudden arrival and pregnancy, and accepted literally everything. Of course, when we informed each other's parents, they had their objections. I expected Stephen's parents to be against it especially. No parent would want their son to take in a woman carrying another man's child. It was easy to imagine their reactions, and I couldn't blame them. However, Stephen's integrity and his genuine commitment to us overcame their objections. Stephen's powerful words to his parents, "I want to stand by her," still resonate with me. My parents, on the other hand, expressed their gratitude and their guilt to Stephen for supporting me and the baby, and insisted he rely on them if anything happened. Stephen blushed at being called my savior, but he held my hand and said, "I'll make you happy." During my difficult pregnancy, he helped with the housework and made sure to come home early to support me after the birth. He captured every moment of Melissa's growth on video, cherishing her as his own. Sometimes, it feels as if my time with Thomas never existed. But this seemingly perfect family image isn't without its burdens. Every time I see Stephen's magnanimity, I feel a pang of guilt. It's as if this is my punishment for not choosing Stephen earlier, and the guilt clings to me, refusing to let go. There are moments when this happiness feels so fragile, and I'm overwhelmed with fear. I'm terrified that when I reveal my secret, it might hurt both of them deeply. Stephen knows all the circumstances and has been living with us, so depending on how Melissa reacts, it might cause trouble for Stephen too. If I was really worried about that, you'd think I would just come clean already, but I just don't have the guts. I get so disgusted with myself when I think about it. One day, I noticed that when Melissa came home from going out with her friend, her expression was stiff and awkward. Usually, after hanging out with her friends, she would come back and talk non-stop about what they did or what they ate, like a motor mouth. But not this time. I was worried because it was so obvious something was wrong, so I asked her,
Did something happen?
but Melissa didn't open up right away. I thought maybe it was just teenage angst or maybe she had a fight with her friend, but it didn't seem like that. She kept glancing at me like she wanted to say something. I decided to wait until she was ready to talk and stopped prying. Honestly, I probably sensed the tension and just avoided it. The time had finally come to reveal the secret. But Melissa couldn't bring herself to say it. That evening, when Stephen came home, I started preparing dinner and called Melissa when it was ready. We eat dinner together every day. In the usual scene, Melissa seemed to gather her courage and spoke up. I went to donate blood with my friend today. Stephen noticed Melissa's tense expression and I could see his face change slightly. They said my blood type is A. I was wondering what that means. I was shaken to my core that Melissa found out the secret this way, and I stopped eating. Both Stephen and I have O-type blood, which Melissa knows. So, she understands that a child with a type blood couldn't be ours biologically. Taking this into account, Melissa is looking to us for an explanation. Actually, we've been telling Melissa that her blood type was O all this time. We listed her blood type as unknown for school documents, and any paperwork with her actual blood type was kept out of her sight. We did this to prevent her from feeling hurt about having a different blood type from us, but now it had completely backfired. But when I tried to explain to Melissa, no words came out and I just stayed silent. Melissa, sensing something was off, looked at me with a sad expression.
Was I abandoned?
And said. I wanted to deny it loudly, but I couldn't speak, and my body stiffened, leaving me silent. Stephen, knowing I wanted to explain in my own words, looked at me but hesitated to speak. Hurt by our lack of response, Melissa's eyes welled with tears. She stood up without a word and went to her room. I realized I had made a huge mistake, but it was too late. Why do I always choke at the crucial moments? Melissa's untouched dinner grew colder and colder. Stephen and I finished our meal in heavy silence, then I wrapped Melissa's uneaten food and put it in the fridge. Just in case she got hungry later. Usually, this is the time when Melissa's laughter and chatter fill the house, but today, it's eerily quiet. Sleeping in such an unsettling silence for the first time, I became acutely aware of the magnitude of the shock Melissa must have felt, and tears welled up in my eyes. As I lay down on my bed, Melissa's earlier words echoed in my mind. She had sounded so heartbreakingly sad. I wanted to hug her immediately, but the fear of being rejected by her kept me from doing so. In the end, I realized I was a coward, more afraid of getting hurt myself than of anything else. I could think of countless ways to berate myself, yet I couldn't find the right words to say to Melissa. Of course, there were many things I wanted to say. Melissa was not an abandoned child. She was my precious child, whom I had given birth to with great pain and love. I remembered every moment, my growing, heavy belly, the labor pains, the warmth of Stephen's hand as he held mine during childbirth. As Melissa grew, her lively nature often worried me, but I could recall like it was yesterday, holding her hand on the way home at sunset, her beaming face when she won first place in the race at the school sports day, and the heartfelt essay she wrote for me. However, I couldn't help but feel that these memories were just my own selfishness. Thoughts kept flooding in, making me feel even more bound by them. With Stephen's help, I had tried to raise Melissa with the utmost care, always trying not to hurt her. I believed I had poured genuine love into her. And yet, I couldn't even deny Melissa's words, nor could I give any response. If I could turn back time, I would immediately deny what she said. I would hug her and tell her she was never an abandoned child, that she was my beloved, blood-related daughter. But it might already be too late. The reason I couldn't deny it right away was that I felt guilty. Melissa might no longer believe my words. Thinking this brought fresh tears of frustration. Then, I heard a knock on my door, and Stephen quietly entered. Stephen said, "Is now a good time?" He sat on the edge of my bed, and I got up to sit next to him. "It's been 17 years.
What a long time, huh?"
Stephen said gently, with a warm tone, rubbing my shoulder. However, I couldn't take his comforting words at face value because of my self-loathing.
"Yeah, the family charade is over,"
I said, in a voice filled with despair. I think I said that because degrading myself was the only way to keep my heart from breaking. Then, Stephen, who was usually so gentle, spoke in an unexpectedly firm tone.
"That's not true,"
Stephen strongly denied.
"Sure, our bond might have been imperfect, but in these 17 years, not one moment of it was a lie."
Then, he squeezed my hand tightly. "Pull yourself together," he said. When I got pregnant with Melissa, I had conveniently leaned on Stephen. I lived my daily life feeling sorry towards Stephen. I often thought I had stolen Stephen's life because of my own weakness, or that I was a bad woman taking advantage of his kindness. Stephen probably noticed my guilt as well. I was ashamed of myself for being able to do nothing but cry, but Stephen gently embraced me and said,
"We are a family."
He said it with such conviction. Those were the words I wanted to hear the most, and at the same time, the words I wanted to convey to Melissa as soon as possible. The next morning, with my eyes swollen from crying, I saw Melissa, who also had swollen eyes. Melissa noticed me sitting on the couch and walked straight over, sitting down beside me. She rested her head on my shoulder and slowly began to speak.
"Dad told me a bit last night. I'm sorry for jumping to conclusions."
According to Melissa, Stephen emphasized that Melissa and I were truly mother and daughter, and that he would always support her no matter what. He had told her to hear from me about the circumstances of her birth and how my relationship with Stephen began. Melissa said she was happy to hear that our relationship would remain unchanged. What a strong young woman she's grown to be, I thought. Seeing Melissa's positive attitude made me feel ashamed of myself for running away without the courage to face things. I took a deep breath and, watching Melissa's expression, began to speak slowly. I told her about her real father, about how Stephen accepted us and made us a family when he found out I was pregnant. As I spoke, the tears I had shed so much the day before began to flow again. Even so, I continued to speak because I wanted to tell Melissa in my own words this time. I told her about the day she first rolled over, the day she ate her first solid food, and the day she took her first steps. These are precious memories I could never forget. I apologized for not being able to put these feelings into words yesterday. I sincerely regretted making her feel uncertain.
"I don't mind if you hate me. I just want to remain your mother,"
I said. "I'm sorry for being selfish." Melissa seemed to think for a moment and then fell silent. After a while, she spoke.
I always thought I was typo, but I'm not.
She laughed and said,
I was worried when you didn't deny it right away, but Mom, you always go quiet when you're upset. I remembered that when I talked to Dad.
Her eyes were filled with a gentle warmth that gave me deep reassurance. Touched by Melissa's words, I shed new tears. Please forgive a mother like me. And whispered like a child. Melissa patted my shoulder and said,
My feelings for our family won't change. Dad, Mom.
She said brightly with tears in her eyes as she looked at Stephen, who had come into the living room at some point. Feeling the bright atmosphere replace the one from yesterday, I finally felt relieved. I cried once more, not knowing how many times it had been, and hugged Melissa. Reaching out to Stephen, the three of us embraced tightly, feeling united. As we held each other firmly, Melissa said, I'm going to make breakfast. So we parted for a moment. Once calm, I felt a bit embarrassed, but also a sense of freshness as if our family had restarted. This was all thanks to Stephen, who cleared up the misunderstanding, and Melissa, who grew up straightforwardly. I resolved once again to be a person who wouldn't embarrass these two wonderful people. How fortunate I am to have met such a wonderful family. Melissa had prepared breakfast, and the table featured soup with the same taste I always made. The side dish was Melissa's original vegetable stir-fry, but the soup was a faithful recreation of the recipe I had taught her. Moments like these made me love Melissa even more, touching my heart deeply. Melissa, looking a bit shy, said,
It tastes just like yours, Mom,
while smiling and taking a sip of the soup. Stephen, with a gentle expression, added,
You did a great job,
praising Melissa. Thus, our daily life was maintained, and we could once again gather around the table with smiles and conversations just like always. Then Melissa, as if she suddenly remembered something, remarked, By the way, I always thought Dad was just kind, but he's got a really dependable side too, huh? Stephen tilted his head in confusion. What do you mean? He asked. Because you quickly helped Mom when she was in trouble. That's really handsome, isn't it? Not everyone can do that, Melissa said with a delighted smile. I too felt saved by Stephen at that time. Even now, I am often helped by Stephen, and I am truly grateful to have someone like him around.
Thank you, dear.
I expressed my gratitude, which had built up over the years. Stop it. With tears in his eyes, Stephen laughed softly and said, Then, at Melissa's enthusiastic request, we had a small wedding ceremony with just a photo session. On the shelf at home, there is a picture of me in a wedding dress, Stephen in formal attire, and Melissa in a mini dress. This photo is an indispensable treasure that tells the story of our family. Listen, can you hear it? Today, Melissa is talking about her latest fitness routine. She aims to get in shape before summer ends. Maybe I should join her. I'm not giving any money to you who have no future. I'm going to take all the inheritance. Heather, the wife of my deceased son Jeffrey, declared loudly in front of us while still wearing morning clothes. Jeffrey worked for a major apparel company and was the store manager at a prime location. However, at the young age of 27, he was involved in a traffic accident and his short life came to an end. My husband Thomas and I have been busy with funeral arrangements while grieving and mourning his death. Yet, despite having just lost her beloved husband in a sudden accident, there are no tears in her eyes. Instead, she only cares about the money he left behind and keeps talking about it without helping much with the funeral, which made me feel suspicion and anger towards her. Let's not talk about that now. There's no will, so it'll be divided according to the proportions set by law. I admonished her. Heather's face instantly distorted and she shouted loudly, "What? I'm just telling the truth. Are you saying you're going to take it to court? Then go ahead and try." She wailed like a spoiled child in front of the coffin where Jeffrey lay. Her hysterical and disrespectful behavior made me sick to my stomach. I was already so sad that it felt like the end of the world losing my son, and now having to endure his wife's money-grubbing tantrums made me struggle to hold back my tears. Thomas frowned in disgust as he overheard our conversation while proceeding with the funeral preparations. "Stop it, just stop. It's right before the funeral. He was your husband. At least see him off quietly. If you want the inheritance that badly, I'll give it to you," I said, somehow managing to say just that while looking down. She seemed convinced she would get the inheritance, and a nasty grin spread across her face. "That's right. Of course I, the young one, should get it. I wonder how much I'll get. I can't wait. She is shameless," I said to myself. Heather stood looking down at me as I sat with my head bowed. So she probably couldn't see it. The slight smile on my lips. I won't let this greedy woman who doesn't even have the decency to mourn Jeffrey have her way. In a trembling voice, I slowly told her, "Yes. I'll give you everything. Every last bit. My name is Betty. I'm 55 years old and successfully raised my son Jeffrey. He moved out of our parents' home as soon as he got a job, so now it's just me and my husband Thomas living a peaceful life. Ever since he was a child, he was serious, kind, helped people in need around town, and was a leader who rallied his classmates at school events. It seemed his friends often came to him for advice, and each time he would listen to them on the phone, rush over to their houses, and loved doing things for others. He developed an interest in fashion, and after graduating college, he got a job at a major apparel company. It's a well-known large corporation with many stores and commercial facilities, especially in urban areas. His personality was well-suited for customer-first service work, and I heard he got good reviews at the company right after joining. On the other hand, the workload was heavy and he lived a busy life every day from what I heard. Even so, he often showed his gratitude to us.
"You let me live at home until I graduated college and paid for my education. This is my way of thanking you,"
he would say. On paydays, he would take us out to eat, arrange trips for me and Thomas, and do so much for us. For us, just having him grow up healthy was more than enough, but we were truly grateful to have a son like him who did all this for us. I was genuinely proud of the wonderful person he had grown up to be. A few years ago, when he was 25, he got married. His wife was a woman from another company in the same industry named Heather.
"Hello, I'm Heather. Jeffrey and I first met through work, and we've been dating since then."
She greeted me with a radiant smile. Perhaps because she worked in the apparel industry, she paid close attention to fashion and beauty, and was a very beautiful person.
"Compared to Jeffrey, I still have a lot to learn at work, but from now on, I want to properly support him in my role as his wife as well. It's nice to meet you,"
she said politely. "There's no need to be so formal," I said, and she laughed shyly. Her smile was also charming, and I took an instant liking to her. I was genuinely happy that he had found such a beautiful and talented wife. Even after they got married, our relationship with Jeffrey and Heather remained good, and they would come back to visit us a few times a year. During those times, the four of us would share meals together, and those moments were always peaceful and filled with the warmth of family, making them happy times. She would help with the cooking, keep me company, and stay close by my side. She also had an adorable charm, and whenever she told a little joke, our home would be filled with bright laughter. In the midst of all this, Jeffrey got promoted and was put in charge of a store in a prime location. Of course, we held a celebratory dinner at our home, with Heather included. After that, whenever Jeffrey could take time off, the four of us would go on trips together, and we would hear about Jeffrey and Heather's happy life over the phone. Both Jeffrey and Heather, and the two of us, were enjoying our days. Heather quit her job at the same time as they got married and was supporting Jeffrey as a housewife. There was even talk of them having a child before it was too late. If that wish came true, I thought excitedly, I might even get to see my grandchild. I believed that this peaceful and happy life would continue on forever like this. However, it suddenly came to an end one day. Jeffrey was involved in a traffic accident while traveling for work and lost his life. The call came on a winter afternoon. Thomas had gone to work, and I was doing housework at home when I received a call. It was from the hospital, informing me that he had been in an accident. My face instantly turned pale, and after quickly contacting Thomas, I rushed to the hospital where he was. When I arrived, he was in the middle of receiving treatment in the operating room. And there, I found Heather, who had arrived before me. She remained expressionless and only gave me a nod of acknowledgement. A young doctor came to greet us. The veteran doctors were probably busy with the treatment and couldn't come out. The doctor told us, looking down, "We're doing everything we can, but it seems he was hit by a large vehicle that ran a red light, and his injuries are severe all over his body. I ask that you, his family, pray for his safety as well." The doctor left with a solemn expression, passing Thomas, who arrived at that moment, and we desperately prayed for Jeffrey's well-being. But a few hours later, we received the worst news. I don't remember much of what happened after that. Jeffrey's work was going well, he was happily married, and had a bright future ahead of him. To think he would close the curtain on his life at the young age of 27. I screamed and cried in front of his body, and spent a long time lost in grief in the funeral room. Afterwards, while being comforted by the doctors, I somehow managed to step out into the hospital corridor. It was as if the entire world had turned pitch black, and my heart was filled with feelings of despair. In a waiting room with just the two of us, Thomas and I cried out loud together. He was working so hard, and was only 27. Losing his life in a sudden accident like this, he must be so resentful. So regretful. Thomas said in a choked voice. I had a hard time escaping the sense of loss, so Thomas helped me with various things like hospital procedures, funeral arrangements, and dealing with the insurance company that came at the same time. While I was in a state of confusion, he helped me without losing his composure on the outside, and I was deeply grateful to him. As for Heather, she seemed to be in shock over losing Jeffrey, and was biting her lip with a solemn expression, her head bowed. The only thing I remember is that there were no tears. Was it because she didn't feel sad? Or was it just that she couldn't cry because I was too distraught? At that time, I was crushed by my own grief and didn't have the capacity to think about her. But time waits for no one. I had to quickly start preparing for the funeral, so I somehow started moving while holding back my sadness. Thomas and I were taking care of everything, but there was something that bothered me. Heather, who had been staying at our house since yesterday, wasn't helping at all. Although my husband was serving as the chief mourner this time, she was still part of the family as his wife. And having just lost her husband, one would think she would emotionally want to do what she could. When they first got married, she would often help me whenever she came to our house. So I knew that she wasn't an inconsiderate person from the beginning. What in the world happened? And far from doing nothing, when she does open her mouth, all she talks about is money. Hey, what's going to happen to the savings he left behind? I can't believe she would say that to us who just lost our son. I feel unpleasant and unintentionally glare at her. Thomas happens to be out making funeral arrangements, so it's just me and her here. There's no will, so I think it will be divided according to the proportions set by law. But let's not talk about that now. We can sort it out properly later, right? When I admonish her like that, she purses her lips while still sitting on the sofa. I feel uncomfortable seeing how shiny and beautifully styled her hair is, to an extent unsuitable for a funeral. But you two have no future left, right? I'm young, so I'll be taking all of his inheritance. Those words make me freeze in the middle of what I was doing. She mocked us as a couple because of our age, and had the audacity to try to take the entire inheritance for herself because she's young. The nerve of her to declare that so boldly filled me with uncontrollable disgust. That's why I'm saying we can't decide now. And please help out a little too. I thought I was stating the obvious, but apparently it was a response she didn't like, because Heather furrowed her brow and advanced on me. What? Are you saying you want his money? How greedy. You want to take it to court? Then go ahead and try. She shouted hysterically, and in addition to anger, I felt shock and sadness welling up inside me. I stare intently at her face with wide eyes. There's not a trace of the bright and kind woman she used to be. Her distorted expression, looking down on us selfishly, is like that of a complete stranger, and I even feel afraid. How did things turn out this way? Unable to keep up with the situation, I am at a loss for words. Is this her true nature? Hey Heather, what's gotten into you? You've been talking about nothing but money. Jeffrey was your husband. You loved him, didn't you? Can't you show a little more tact? Fighting back the urge to burst into tears from the confusion, I stare up at Heather looking down at me with a terrifying expression. Jeffrey's portrait with a smiling face is displayed in the room. Why are we having this exchange in this situation? Huh? What do you mean by tact? Should I cry until my makeup runs? That's stupid. I never liked or loved that boring, overly serious guy. I only married him because I thought I wouldn't have to worry if I married a store manager at a big company. Her revelation hits me like a punch to the gut. Jeffrey and Heather always seemed so close, and I remember teasing them a few times, saying, "You two get along so well." And Jeffrey seemed to love her from the bottom of his heart. Yet it was all a lie. My fingertips tremble with frustration. I thought he would make even more money in the future, so it's too bad he died. But I can't cry pathetically like you. No way. I'm at a loss for words. That day, when I was distraught over his death, this woman was looking at me with such contempt. It was easy to get you to like me. Before I met him, I worked night shifts in the service industry, so I'm good at catering to older people. It felt nice to have you fooled so skillfully. I clench my trembling hands and glare at her as I stand up. Actually, I had intended to give all of Jeffrey's inheritance to her from the beginning. If a young wife suddenly loses her husband, she would be worried about her future, and we have our savings so far, so we won't have trouble getting by. But I can't forgive her for saying it like this. At this point, I don't want to easily hand over his inheritance. No, we'll discuss it through a lawyer. For now, just be quiet and focus on the funeral. I tell Heather in a strong voice. She clicks her tongue loudly, runs her fingers through her long hair, and leaves. Even though Heather claims to be a housewife, her appearance is strangely beautiful, and I can tell she spends money on her hair and skin. Many of her belongings seem to be from famous brands too. I thought she was a beautiful person even before they got married, but at that time she was also working, so I didn't feel anything was off. But now, she's not earning her own money. Thinking that she's obtaining all those things with his income makes me feel uncomfortable. Afterwards, the funeral proceeded as planned. He was a very loving son and our pride and joy. I hope he can be happy in heaven. With that wish, Thomas and I saw Jeffrey off in tears. Later, when I told Thomas about Heather, he instantly became furious.
I can't forgive her for deceiving not only us, but Jeffrey all this time. I thought it would be our job to help support her life after this, but not anymore.
He slams the table at home with all his might, his face bright red with anger, causing a cup placed there to topple over. I hurriedly wipe it up and nod at him with a serious expression. It feels like we're striking back at Jeffrey's enemy after his death. We absolutely won't let that woman have her way. And a week later, we decided to discuss the inheritance again with a lawyer present. We found out that Jeffrey, with his earnest and solid personality, had quite a lot of savings for his age without spending the salary he earned as a store manager frivolously. As soon as she hears that, Heather's eyes light up with excitement. Perhaps because she revealed her true colors once, she no longer tries to hide it, and the way she blatantly exposes her desires is unsightly.
$100,000? Really? That's what I can inherit, right? If I remember correctly, the wife has the highest priority in inheritance, right?
The lawyer suppresses her eager outburst and begins to explain in more detail. It's not just the deposits in the bank that are considered assets. The lawyer politely explained various details, but Heather, blinded by the deposits in front of her, didn't seem to be listening and was spaced out the whole time. As soon as the lawyer finished talking, Heather confronted us in a forceful tone.
So, it's settled that I'm the one inheriting all that, right? I'm sure you two already have plenty of savings, and I still have a long life ahead of me.
Okay? She's selfish and overbearing in every way.
Hey, give up the inheritance. You don't need it, right?
Her excessively pushy attitude overwhelms me, unpleasant as it is. Some time had passed since then, but it seems her feelings haven't changed after all. I had hoped she would reflect a little and be open to discussion, so having all of that shattered left me completely demotivated. She's dressed fashionably again today, her hair beautifully styled as if she just went to the salon, and her skin and eyes are glowing enough to tell she's using high-end cosmetics. The bag placed on the table as if to show off has a famous brand logo on it. It has hardly any signs of use, so it's probably new. Thomas, sitting next to me, is clenching his fists and looks like he's about to lunge at her at any moment, but he seems to be holding back somehow. It's impossible to persuade her at this rate. I didn't want this argument to drag on into an even longer dispute. We're in the depths of grief from losing Jeffrey, and I don't want to prolong this trouble any further with self-centered Heather over the inheritance. Exhausted both physically and mentally, I had no energy left to fight her anymore.
Well, if you insist that much, fine. As you say, you're still young. I'm sure Jeffrey earned that money for his life with you, so I'll let you have the entire inheritance.
Yes, all of it. When I say that weakly, Heather's face lights up.
I knew it! Why not?
The unsightliness of it makes me unintentionally dismiss her as shameless in my mind. The lawyer properly recorded our conversation, and with that, it was decided that Jeffrey's entire inheritance would go to this arrogant Heather. My husband and I head home together with disgruntled expressions, not speaking to each other. An indescribable unpleasant feeling was spreading in our hearts. From then on, we spent our days thinking about Jeffrey. That said, it's the usual life of Thomas going to work and me taking care of the house. But there are no more calls from Jeffrey. My voice no longer reaches him. Every time I realized that, I felt like crying from the sense of loss. And so, about 3 months passed. On days off, Thomas and I would go for walks in the nearby park or relax and drink coffee at home while reminiscing about Jeffrey. In the midst of such sad yet leisurely days, the phone at home rang one afternoon. The caller was an unexpected person. It was Heather. We haven't even spoken, let alone met, since the discussion with the lawyer. She probably has no more use for us, and we don't want to see her face either. So why did she suddenly contact us? I pressed the call button, wondering. Then, Heather's flustered voice came through from the other end of the line.
Hey, listen. I got a repayment demand for debt sent to my house. It's $90,000.
So that's what it was about, I realized. Actually, during the discussion with the lawyer, there was a concerning matter brought up. However, Heather at the time was completely carried away by the savings she would get her hands on and wasn't properly listening. Thomas and I knew that, but deliberately said nothing, gave up the inheritance, and let her have everything.
It's all Jeffrey's debt. I never heard about this. Hey, do I have to pay this back? Did you know about it?
Her loud, ranting voice was annoying, and I sighed.
Jeffrey's entire estate has been inherited by you. That includes the obligation to repay debts, all of it.
When I clearly state that, she lets out a disgruntled groan. The company Jeffrey worked for was indeed a major one, but it seems their business had been tough lately. The burden of that fell on the store managers of each location. Jeffrey was made to conduct business at his own expense under the company's orders. He was generating sales by buying the store's goods with his own money. Earnest as he was, he probably had a strong sense of loyalty to the company. Unable to refuse doing business at his own expense, he must have been following orders to protect the company while taking on a large amount of debt. When I explained that to her, she cried out.
Debt from doing business at his own expense? I've never heard of such a thing. I knew you weren't listening. The lawyer properly explained it at the time.
When I say that, she retorts.
What do you mean you knew? If you knew I missed it, why didn't you tell me?
Heather snapped back, her loud voice reverberating.
Even if you say that, it can't be helped since you weren't listening. You said you wanted to inherit everything yourself after hearing the explanation through. I totally thought you would take on everything, including the debts.
When I say that with a bit of spite, she grinds her teeth and throws a tantrum.
But you could have checked with me. I consulted a lawyer myself, but apparently it's been 3 months since then, so I can't even give up the inheritance anymore. Even if I inherit $100,000 in cash, if there's $90,000 in debt, I only get $10,000. If you include interest and processing fees, it'll end up in the negative. This isn't how it was supposed to be. What are you going to do about it?
To Heather, who was ranting on and on, I firmly told her.
No matter what you say, I don't want to hear it anymore. Jeffrey is gone, and we're just strangers now. If you want to resent someone, resent yourself for being blinded by money.
And before Heather could start saying anything else, I quickly hung up the phone. I couldn't help but sigh. Even at this point, what a troublesome woman she is. She thought she was getting a large inheritance, but instead she ended up with debt. She can feel as elated or flustered as she wants on her own, but I wish she would stop complaining to me when we have no relationship anymore. And to think that Jeffrey's wife, who has already gone to heaven, was such a mean-spirited woman, it still makes me sad. I wonder if Jeffrey in heaven is watching our exchange now. I wonder how he feels. In any case, what she does with the money she received and the debt is now up to her to deal with. She's already an adult, so we have no obligation to worry about her. We'll probably never speak to or see each other again. With that mindset, I decided to return to my normal life. I frequently visited Jeffrey's grave, cleaned his tombstone while reminiscing about old times, and offered flowers. Each time his grave got dirty from the rain, I would polish it clean. And then, a few weeks later, one day, the doorbell of our house rang. It was a weekday, and Thomas was away at work, so I stopped my housework and went to answer it. And there, standing with a distorted face looking like she was about to cry, was Heather, whom I thought I would never see again.
"What brings you here to our house?"
I asked. She pushed her way into the entrance of our house and then apologized. "Please, lend me money." For a moment, I felt dizzy. Why is this person always only concerned about money? She looked up at me with upturned eyes.
"I can't finish paying off his debts. Right after inheriting the estate, I got a lump sum of money and got carried away spending it. I went on overseas trips, bought multiple bags I wanted, treated my friends to expensive meals. Because of that, I don't have enough money to pay it back, and now it's become my debt."
"And? So what?" I said coldly. Everything is entirely her own doing. Begging for Jeffrey's inheritance, getting carried away with the leftover savings, not listening to the talk about the debt, and spending all the money on luxuries. Before that, she did all of that herself. Why does she feel the need to tell me? Surely she doesn't think I'll lend her money after hearing that story. It's embarrassing as a fellow human being.
"I consulted my parents first. But when I told them everything, they said it was my own fault and refused to help me. I have housing costs and living expenses to worry about, and I don't have any income since I was a housewife. Please, even a little, just $10,000, lend me some money."
With a strong determination not to get involved, I told her, who was looking up at me, in a cold tone. "Wait, who are you?"
"Huh?"
Her face froze.
"My deceased son Jeffrey's wife is already a stranger to me.
This is trespassing and extortion. I'll call the police." Saying that, I took out my cell phone. She must have thought I was really going to call the police. She twisted her face into a mess, glared at me intensely for a moment, and then fled from our house as if running away. And I firmly closed the front door, determined to never get involved with her again. No job, accustomed to luxury, and drowning in debt. It's a fitting end for a greedy, evil woman who deceived Jeffrey and didn't even mourn the death of Jeffrey, who loved her. That night, when I told Thomas about it, he seemed to take it seriously. He set her phone number to reject calls on our home phone and each of our cell phones, and even informed our lawyer to have a restraining order issued against her. To be extra cautious, we also strongly warned each of our family members to never engage with her even if she showed up. After that, Heather ended up having to pay off the debt herself. At first, she was apparently looking for a full-time job, but she kept applying for high-paying positions beyond her qualifications and getting rejected. As time passed, the debt rapidly increased, and she eventually had to get by with a low-wage part-time job. Since the daytime job alone wasn't enough, she apparently started working a second job in the night service industry, but due to her age, she couldn't earn as much as she hoped and kept getting more and more haggard. Furthermore, unable to kick her luxury spending habit, she still couldn't stop splurging, making it difficult to escape the debt hell. In the end, she had to move out of her original apartment, and halfway through, she moved into an old, cheap apartment. And so, the seasons cycle back to winter.
"It's cold,"
Thomas said. It was the anniversary of Jeffrey's death, and relatives had gathered to share a meal. "Yes. I hope Jeffrey is staying warm in heaven," I replied. I wonder if earnest and kind Jeffrey is still watching over us from heaven. I find myself suddenly hoping that he has met a good person there. A lot has happened, but we still have a future ahead of us. It's truly sad that Jeffrey passed before us, but let's continue living energetically together. When I smiled at him, he nodded back with a smile. From now on, we will keep living. Without being greedy, without putting on airs, cherishing the person next to us, living peacefully. The smiling face of Jeffrey in the framed photo in the room looks so very warm.